This video response is going to go out to Danica Mckellar, and that's because she published a book entitled Math Doesn't Suck, and it's right here, okay? And I've been reviewing the book through several videos right now, and I'm going to go ahead and review yet another chapter of the book, and I'm going to tell you my thoughts on it. Some of it was okay, some of it was like, oh, you know, but we'll get into that. The first thing I'd like to say, though, is that you had talked about consuming caffeinated products, and there is a joke about how people in New York use caffeinated water to make coffee. Interesting concept there. The thing is that a little bit of caffeine doesn't hurt anybody, really, but if you're consuming lots and lots of caffeine over a lengthy period of time, they do have studies that clearly show that it can cause harm. And I don't want teenagers getting in the habit of constantly consuming caffeine because after a while, as they get older, it can cause problems later in life. And this was clearly illustrated in an episode of Saved by the Bell. And if you know what episode we're talking about here, you know what I'm talking about. It's just, you don't want to constantly stimulate your body like that. It's not healthy. And so that's the first thing I'm like, I don't really know that you'd want to use this as an illustration in your math book. But anyway, so all right. Now, I agree with you. Multiplying the numerators and multiplying the denominators of fractions, that's how you multiply fractions. Okay, that's fine. All right. Now, if you're an aspiring performer in a theatrical production, okay, I'm going to say this again. If you're an aspiring performer in a theatrical production, if you will utilize the techniques of Harry Lorraine's memory book, whoops, sorry, old Christmas card, my mistake, but if you will utilize the techniques of Harry Lorraine's memory book, you can actually remember your lines a lot easier. This is true, okay? Now, the real problem in performing in a theatrical production is trying to demonstrate or show the proper emotions at the right time during a stage performance. That's difficult. You can't learn that from a book. Okay? You can't really memorize that from a line in a script. That doesn't work that way. You really have to practice the emotional convey. You have to memorize how to convey properly the emotions you're trying to convey. That is a real struggle. Okay? Now, let me think about this for a second. Let's say you are not assigned a leading role in a theatrical performance. What makes the person who is producing this production think that you could be somebody who could design costumes or be a makeup artist or a prop, somebody who builds the props, or somebody who prepares people's hair for the production, or whatever. What makes that production person think that you could do any of this stuff? All right. Now, does the person that didn't get the lead role, do they have a natural talent to do any of this stuff? Maybe they could be a secondary character. You know, just because you don't get the leading role doesn't mean that you aren't a part of the production. Maybe you're better for a different role. Okay? And if you're really good at building props or designing costumes or putting the costumes together, or you're a good makeup artist, or you're good with designing a person's hair or whatever for a particular production, why would you try out for a leading role in the first place? Okay? Now, if the person in charge of producing this production thinks you don't know how to do math, and you know this, why are you trying to help them at all? Personally, I would find another theatrical performance to be a part of, or I would put on my own theatrical production. Why would you put up with somebody like that? If you know that person thinks you can't do math, don't work for them. Give me a break, especially if you do know how to do math. That's silly. Okay. Now, granted, again, any number that is divided by itself is 1. So if you divide 7 by 7, you're going to get the answer of 1. If you divide 8 by 8, you're going to get the answer of 1. So on and so forth. That's true. Now, again, we're going to go back to the oven dial, where you're flipping the fraction 90 degrees. Okay? And yes, you want to remember to multiply mixed fractions clockwise. Okay? Because you know that a clock starts here, goes down, comes back up, and goes the opposite direction. So if you've got a mixed fraction, you're going to multiply clockwise. Okay? And for an illustration, and this is something I didn't understand, why this was not placed in your book. Why didn't you take a clock like this and just simply place that in your book? I would have done that, and I would have said, you know, this is how you do things clockwise. This is counterclockwise. This is clockwise. You could have very clearly illustrated that in your book. Why you didn't? I will never know. But if you're going to do mixed fractions, that's the illustration I would have used. Okay? So let's go on here. If the numerator of a fraction is larger than the denominator of a fraction, rotate the fraction clockwise and divide. And I discussed this in my last video when I reviewed your last chapter. Okay? Now, let's look up the etymology of the word reciprocal. All right. Let's see. All right. Okay. The Latin prefix re means to come back, to actually go in reverse. Okay, this would be like the reverse in the car. So if you have a car, you're going to if you're going to go in reverse in that car, you would go to the R, which would be re. Okay, the Latin prefix re is to go backwards. Okay, now also imagine when you have the gears of the car, you have the reverse, you have the neutral, you have the D. Well, let's replace the D with pro, because pro always means to move forward. Okay, and that's where you get the pro in reciprocal. Okay, and that means to go forwards. Okay, and then no. Okay, that's not right. Need some more of this. I'm sorry that I didn't have a chance to do all this, but let's see. Okay. Let's see. Okay. AL is actually a Latin suffix. It means something that is related to something else. Okay. You can use relatives to handle that part, but they don't seem to be real clear about what the Latin root word cus is, and I'm not finding too much on it either. That's really kind of puzzling here. Okay. Because if you take the word procus, it would be, if you put the prefix pro with the cus, what I'm getting at here is somebody that is like a male or female suitor. This would be in reference to somebody that you're trying to court somebody in a relationship, that kind of thing. Okay, and that doesn't kind of really fit with this, but anyway, you kind of get an idea. So you're kind of going back and forth when you reciprocate. Alright? And probably I should go to that. Okay, so what actually is happening here, because reciprocal is like reciprocating. In other words, somebody gives you a gift and then you give them a gift, and the act of giving them a gift after they've given you a gift is reciprocating, and that's where you get reciprocal. Okay, and that's where that comes from. Okay. Alright, now, the best way I illustrated reciprocals, I actually did a video on this, and the best way I represented that, I had a friend of mine, and she did an actual handstand. And the visual of doing that handstand was the way I illustrated reciprocal. Okay? But here's what I'm thinking here. If you had a newspaper or a magazine, and you tried to do a reciprocal of that, well, you really couldn't read the dang thing, much less speed read it, which I usually do speed reading on this stuff. You couldn't read that article upside down. And so, and I have to think in this direction. Who reads any periodical anyway? I mean, gee, you go into any grocery store or department store or wherever where they have a magazine rack or a bookstore, most of those magazines just sit there forever until somebody collects them and recycles them, and they put out new ones. People, when they read stuff anymore, they read it off their computer or their tablet or their phone. They don't read it off of a magazine rack these days most of the time. And even if they glance at it, say in the checkout line, they're never going to buy the dang thing. I mean, once in a while they do, but normally, let me tell you something, I work in retail, and I've watched how many times they take that stuff off the shelf, and they ship it back for recycling, and they put out the new stuff. Hardly anything sells. And this is getting the same way with books, too. You'll see this. You'll see books just sitting on the shelf for months and maybe years on end. Fortunately, I'm one of those people that actually buys and reads books, but a lot of times they don't. So, you are correct in saying that when you divide fractions, you multiply the reciprocal of the second part. Now, let me look that up. I covered this in a video. Okay. A long time ago. Okay. The dividend is the first number in a division problem. The divisor is the second number in a division problem. The quotient is your answer. Okay? So what you're wanting to do in a fraction division problem, okay, if you're going to divide fractions, you're going to want to take the dividend and multiply the reciprocal of the divisor. And that's the correct language. Why this was not in your book, I have no idea. But I'm telling you that here. Okay, so let me say that again. In a division problem involving two fractions, if you have two fractions and you're going to divide the first fraction by the second, the first fraction is the dividend, the second fraction is the divisor. So you're going to take the dividend and you're going to multiply the reciprocal of the divisor to get your quotient. And that is correct terminology. And why that was not in your book, I don't know. But anyway, it should, as far as I'm concerned, it should have been. But anyway, there is what I have to say about it. So, overall, it wasn't really particularly a bad chapter of the book, but it was just like, I think I could have included a lot more material than what you did, and I certainly seem to have done that. So I think that material should have been included in your book. All right. Anyway, you're more than welcome to share your thoughts with me. Go ahead and leave your comments down here in the comments below. I will tell you more in a future video, so I'd like for you to stay tuned.